Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm David.
And this is the Practical Guitarist Podcast.
The podcast for people who eat, sleep, and breathe guitar. The Practical Guitarist Podcast is brought to you by Great Lakes Guitar Pickups. Great Lakes Guitar Pickups provides fantasy tones at prices a practical guitarist will love. Featuring top-notch construction, attention to detail, and a fully custom product, if you can dream it, Great Lakes Guitar Pickups can probably build it. Follow them on Facebook at facebook.com/Great Lakes Guitar Pickups. Are you a regular listener? Why not? David here reminding you of all the ways you can participate in the Practical Guitarist Podcast. Subscribe using your chosen podcast app. Review us on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or Google Play. Find our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Practical Guitarist or on Twitter as @PractGuitarist. Support the show. Merchandise is available in our Threadless store at practicalguitaristpodcast.threadless.com. And donate to us via Patreon, available at patreon.com/practicalguitarist. Reach out to us directly via email at questions@practicalguitarist.com. Hello, Jim.
Hello, David.
I heard you spent your afternoon rewiring your PS4.
It is so ridiculous to have these things. It's so expensive and such a everybody in bed with everybody else to try to get this stuff done. It's just ridiculous that I have to go through this, or anybody has to go through it, for that matter, to get a simple digital or analog signal out of a PS4.
You think we'd be in the world today where all of this stuff would talk to one another?
Yep. But we're not. Nope. We're not. There's so much a set of standards that it's still proprietary.
What standard?
Yeah, exactly. It's what is standard to some, it's not so standard to others.
I can recall getting into an argument with relatives about what was standard in the workplace for video display from an external device.
Oh my God!
And it's like they were pushing for, now bear in mind this was 6 years ago, right? And they were pushing for HDMI, and I'm like, you can't be 100% sure they're going to have that. I'm like, you might think they do, but you should always have adapters because you never know what you're going to walk into. And we actually did it at work. We have people come in and present, and we have a set of adapters that includes HDMI, DVI, VGA. I think we have DisplayPort now, mini DisplayPort. Like, we have them all, and they're on like a key ring. So with a bunch of brightly colored zip ties so people don't forget them.
I would be, let me say this. If you'd have asked me 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, if they were going to leave mini or micro HDMI, USB, I would have said, no, there's no reason. There's no point in changing the USB standard. And
now
we are.
USB-C. Or 3.1 for those of you that are so inclined.
Yeah.
Because they can't even just give it one name. It has to have two.
And then, what's more confusing to the average consumer is you walk into a store now, and excuse me, folks, I'm eating a Snickers bar because this is how I'm getting my food tonight.
He's hangry.
Yeah. I'm not myself, and so I've had my Snickers. The average consumer walks into Walmart, goes to buy an USB cable. Now, instead of the standard USB port that we used to have at the computer, you're getting a C at the other end as well. And so here's all these adapters you have that you plug into the wall and all these wall outlets that you have. All of a sudden, oh, wait, no, now it's going to be C at that end. Hey, haven't spent enough money. Let's change it just because.
I have, so I went to a local electronics shop a couple weeks ago, place where I get cheap audio cables and stuff like that. And I went in to go get a USB-C cable because of my new interface is USB-C enabled. 3.1, whatever. It's not Thunderbolt. That's another whole thing. Thunderbolt is the same thing as USB-C in terms of connections. But your hardware may not be compatible.
Right.
So anyway, I went to the store to buy a USB-C cable, and I look all over, and I find like they have like a couple of like 3-footers, 4-footers, right? They don't have anything other than that.
Yeah.
And I'm digging around, and I find in another section of the store, I find more, and they're different sizes. So I got 2. I got the one I'm using, and I got one that was slightly longer because I figured I was going to need it. But you know what the funny thing is? The slightly longer one I got at home, and even though the package says USB-C on the outside, like on the tag, there's one little place in text on the bottom where it says USB-C to SATA. No, it's not SATA. It's eSATA. And I'm like, this is not what I wanted. So, being that I'm a computer guy, I just stuck it in the drawer because I'm like, at some point I'll need it. But at this point, I just shook my head. I was like, man, this is why this stuff's getting out of hand. I'm so glad that that guitar players only use like 3 different types of cables.
Well, okay, so yeah, I want to go. I want to take this a little bit further and then come back to the guitar cable thing. So, we, my understanding is, and I don't think it's been confirmed yet, that the iPhone 11 is going to go USB-C. They're going to come away from the Thunderbolt.
Where have you heard this?
That was a hard rumor from one of those well-to-do tech sites that talk about, some of the leaks for the new iPhone.
No, I haven't seen that to be accurate.
Yeah.
They're going to have a Lightning to USB-C cable because the new charge brick is going to be USB-C, but the connection on the phone is still going to be their Lightning connector.
Is it going to be the Lightning connector they have now?
Yeah.
That's good.
And the reasoning is it's thinner than the USB-C connector.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to want to. USB-C is actually kind of going backwards from micro USB in a form factor. Well, it's a lot bigger.
Yes and no. It's actually not that much bigger, right? But here's the thing: it's a lot more robust. So USB, the old USB B, or that's the micro, whatever that format, because there's a 4-pin and then there was the 5-pin. The one that everything has now, the micro, I believe that's the 5-pin, right. And that thing it's really small, but it's extremely easy to mess those cables up and to jack them up when you're using them. I've had several break on me, and I know other people have expressed the same thing, which is why I think, so if you see the USB-C plug, it's a unibody design. And the way it transmits data over it and stuff is supposed to be better as well. But it's one standard to rule them all. That was the whole thing. It was, now we're going to have all our devices on the same cable standard.
So you'll go C to C.
Except that it's not yet, because we're still using USB-A, and
that's right. And the A is on most of your computers that you've got now. It's on most of your
it's asinine
wall jacks. It's on most of your the car jack or the car power. All
right. So
now, so you go to guitar cables. What have we got? We got 1/4 inch. So we've either got TRS or we've got 2 connectors.
TRS, and maybe if you're a guitar player, you've also used XLR, and maybe you've used MIDI. That's 4 different types of cables, and that's it.
Right.
And then if you get into the realm of like digital recording, then you've probably experimented with things like SPDIF and all the other digital connection standards, because there's a bunch of them.
Coaxial USB, or coaxial digital, or optical digital, which is what I was messing with today.
Yeah, and SCSI and all those different.
But the thing is, for the most part, I'm not talking about
for your average guitar player, 4 cables, if that,
and for most 2.
Right.
You're either TRS or your 1/4 inch. And actually, the only dangerous part is speaker cable, making sure you're not using a guitar jack as a speaker cable.
Hey, Jim, think about this. Think about this for a minute. 1/4 inch plugs have been in use by guitarists pretty much since the beginning.
Yeah. Since the 40s or whatever.
Yeah. You want to talk about esotericism?
Mm-hmm.
That's one way to do it. No, but the reality is we don't need any more than that.
No.
I mean, we could go to a smaller plug, but
nobody's been running around going, you know what? We need to make those jacks smaller. We need to make the guitars, when they went to thinner guitars, you think, okay, you come up with like some quote unquote USB-C type of connection for your super light guitars like the Parkers and stuff.
If Les Paul had gotten his way, we could all be using XLR plugs.
Oh yeah. Yep.
I mean, we probably would have used balanced cables, but I actually think there would be advantages to using XLRs because it wouldn't pull out of the guitar. So I don't know. That's just a thought. Man. So Robert Jackson obviously has already discussed this, and we haven't really touched on it. But we're going to talk about the Gibson countersuit from Dean. Dean's filing a countersuit against Gibson. And actually, offline, Jim and I had a conversation shortly after we did the original run at Gibson, and the conversation was essentially that we were trying to figure out why Gibson would do this. And I mentioned at the time that I think this is really a reflection on Gibson trying to get rid of some dealers of products that they would like to have as dealers, right? And so they're kind of running a little bit of a PR campaign, I think,
right,
where they've got this big lawsuit and it makes everybody aware that these are knockoff guitars. And maybe Gibson's even fully aware that this is not going to do them any favors, that this is not going to be something they're going to win in court. But they're doing it from the perspective of, number one, we have to show people that we're willing to do this. Number two, we have to make the public aware that these guitars are knockoffs, which the public is probably already aware. And number three, we have to put some pressure on these dealers to realize that they can carry the Gibson brand. And look, we've talked about Gibson's buy-in. It's ridiculous. It's really high. But I've been hearing lately that may be changing. And I have heard rumblings that this whole thing may be a stunt in order for them to motivate some dealers to lose their Dean licenses and maybe some of their other knockoff licenses and try to get Epiphone in the door there. I'm not going to, I mean, you guys know how I feel about Epiphone. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I think that's the greatest thing in sliced bread, but it does make sense. And it's the only thing in this chaotic mess that actually does seem to make sense. So the countersuit kind of confirms this because they're basically, Dean is alleging that Gibson has now come into some of their dealers with letters and said, you have to cease and desist selling this product. I've not seen the letters. I know that they're probably circulating around in some circles, but that's certainly what it sounds like. This is an intimidation tactic to put pressure on these dealers. Hey, you know you're selling crap product. Like you're selling a what is essentially in Gibson's mind an illegal competitor, and they're trying to make that. I think this is really more geared towards the people who can't afford Gibsons, who are like looking at alternatives, right? That this is a PR stunt aimed at them, saying, look, you can buy that, but it's not authentic, you know, and hashtag play authentic, Mark Agnesi, you know, in his kidnapping video. I showed my buddy, I had a friend over this week. He's not a guitar player. And I showed him that video and he's like, what? He's like, it looks like he's being held at ransom. And I'm like, yeah, that's what everybody's been saying. Like,
yeah, the look on his face. It's pretty funny. There's some stills from that. He literally looks like he's you know, please send money so they don't behead me.
Oh, I love that. I love that video of the I think it was an Ibanez V from the 70s where he opened it up and he was super excited. He's like, "Oh, this is so cool." And I'm sitting there thinking like, boy, if you only knew where you were going to be in 5 years.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I think Mark seems like he's a pretty nice guy. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna pick on Robert a little bit because he made a comment in his video that made me laugh when I read it or when I heard it. It kind of go, really, Robert? He says in his video that you know, this lawsuit against dealers is going to hurt the little guy. You don't think Gibson's lawsuit against, you know, anybody and their lawsuit back is going to hurt the little guy? I mean, let's be honest. Gibson employs a lot of little guys that work there. And we got to keep in mind, it's easy to put an unhappy face on a big faceless corporation like Gibson, which is the way people perceive it. It's a lot smaller than people think it is. Even though it's a high value item. I mean, there's probably only a couple hundred employees in the whole company. Which for in terms of the amount of money that they deal with and like the product that they make is pretty surprising. But Gibson is about the same size as Fender, right? Unless you consider the subsidiaries. My point is that if you look at it from that perspective, like this is a no win for anybody. It's not a win for the consumer. It's not a win for the dealer. It's not a win for Dean, and it's certainly not a win for Gibson.
No, those legal fees, whoever wins, loses, or doesn't pay at all, the legal fees passed on to the consumers. They're passed on through raised prices and so on and so forth.
This is a long game. This is a long game thing anyway, though. If it's really a PR stunt or a warning shot or whatever you want to call it, I think this is a PR stunt more than anything else. And it's funny. They did this to PRS, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
And
a little more than that, about 18 years ago now.
Yeah, and nothing largely came of that. I mean, they won the case, and then they turned around and lost the case in an upper court. And when you stop and you think about this, nobody was getting all up in arms when that happened. I mean, I'm sure there were people out there that were, but I was on forums back then. I don't remember people freaking out that Gibson was suing PRS. In fact, I remember reading a lot of people who were like, yeah, they should sue PRS because the single cut is a total knockoff of Les Paul.
Yep.
Which was really surprising because now if that happened, everybody would be like, oh, Gibson's evil because they're suing PRS for knocking off the Les Paul.
Well, they're the new guys to hate.
Right.
It's cool to hate on Gibson, especially in what we see or perceive as news channels, because we only have guitar podcasts and YouTube channels. So, people like us, we're and I'm not saying we're using Gibson to forward our channel, but there are people who are folks who they think that that's the only way to do it is to hate on the big guy.
Well, so
it's unfortunate, but that's true.
So I agree. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we're not getting listeners by talking about this whole controversy. And thank you, Gibson, for giving this to us because we might be the only people benefiting from this. The media, podcasting and YouTube communities and all that stuff. Like, anytime this kind of controversy happens, of course, it sparks a lot of debate, which is healthy for our business. But I personally look at this situation and kind of think to myself, like, this is more evidence that Gibson's not on track yet. They haven't really figured out where they're going. They know that they kind of got to change their product up a little bit. They got to do a back to basics thing. They got to listen to their customers, but they still haven't quite figured out how to run their business. And it's kind of chilling to an extent because this is a big company, right? Like, so not everybody that was there under Henry Jeskowitz is now gone, right?
Right.
Many of those people are still in positions of power within the organization. So I kind of look at this and I go, who signed off and said that they should keep this lawsuit going? Because it's not the financial outlay. Look, a corporate to corporate lawsuit, these lawyers aren't retained, they're employees. So it's probably not as financially insane as, like, say, if you were a small company with like 20 people and you had to go hire lawyers to sue somebody else for intellectual property right infringement, right?
Well, I would. All right. So when it comes to lawyers, and I'm not sure because I'm not a Gibson employee. I don't manage Gibson.
Well, this is based on my experience with corporate law firms through my place of employment.
But a company of their size, they probably have their lawyers are retained. They're on a pretty permanent retainer, but they're retained. In other words, they're paying them a monthly fee a monthly stipend of some kind.
Oh, I'll bet you they're actually employees nowadays, because there's a lot of reasons why, but I'm willing to bet that they're employees over there. That company's big enough. They've got enough subsidiaries. They have an on-staff legal department. Almost all the big companies like that are on staffing now for that stuff because it's just too expensive to go outside. It is.
Yeah.
So, but that's be that as it may. There's a lot of cost involved in that, but I'm still not sure that cost is so much that it's getting passed on to us as higher bills come next year in 2020. I don't think that's realistic. I think Gibson, because just hearing from other small builders who have been approached by Gibson in the past for things like this, I have a feeling their legal department is extremely active over there. So I have a feeling we're already paying those bills. Yeah, that's another interesting thing that's come out of this. So like people are kind of like naming names, and some of these small builders have been like approached by Gibson before to stop building something. Many small builders have been approached. And so that's an interesting concept because, everybody acts like, well, Gibson didn't defend themselves for the last 40 years. We don't know how many letters went back and forth between them and Dean.
Right.
And that's an interesting thing. That's why I think the last time we talked about this on the show, I said, this is really not a place for public opinion to enter into this because we don't have all the information. They're not going to give us all the information. We may never have all the information. This may never actually make it to a courtroom. This may be something that gets settled out of court and, people are paid and some agreements are made and that's that. And that happens with these kinds of lawsuits. It does. However, they're far enough down the path at this point that I think we're headed towards actual arbitration. So it'd be interesting to see how this all pans out. In terms of, for the community at large, my concern is that since Gibson seems to be so out of touch, one of the things that Gibson needs to be doing right now is getting in touch with who their market's going to be in the next 10 to 15 years, right? This is going to be really hard for a lot of people to hear. So, Jim, bear with me because I have a feeling you're going to have a lot to say here in a minute after I say what I'm going to say. But Gibson does not have a market with millennials. Okay, I don't know a single person under the age of 30 right now who owns a Gibson that bought it any other way than secondhand. And that's a problem. And now I say millennials, but what I mean is the generation after millennials, right? The people that are keeping the fires going over at Fender right now, like those building those fires super high. And there's a couple of things I've noticed, like Fender is doing a terrific job marketing to women. They're doing a terrific job marketing to young people. They're doing a terrific job marketing to entry level people. And I just don't see Gibson's efforts that way over there. Like they're more focused on selling to the people that have been buying Gibsons for a really long time. Their core audience. Now, first off, I don't have the marketing expertise and have their numbers to know who they're actually going to be able to sell to. But I would suspect that if Fender is making a clear delineation and changing their model to kind of fit what's going on in the industry and what's going on in the world at large, it's kind of shocking to me that Gibson isn't. What does Fender know that Gibson doesn't? Or is it really just that the groups of people that will buy the two distinct brands are that different? I have a hard time believing that. That's why I'm saying, like, I don't have all the marketing statistics behind that, but go ahead.
And so, yeah, I obviously don't have a big connection to a millennial group of anyone. So I represent older gigging musicians when it comes to what I know and who I know. So,
and you guys are still buying Gibsons,
and we're still buying Gibsons. But I can tell you this. So, how can I say this? A larger number of musicians my age look to Fender more than Gibson. You'd be shocked probably.
Yeah, and I think it's largely regional too, though.
Are in there? Yeah. I don't know anybody on the West Coast. Well, I know people on the West Coast, but not that many people. Where East Coast wise, at least North Atlantic or the Atlantic and up. For the most part, there's a lot of players who do, and the ones who own Gibsons, they don't own the standard. They own
No.
a studio, or they own an SG, or they own a tribute.
Well, who owns
Or
a
a
standard
classic.
now? They were $3,500 for 5 years.
Yeah, so for the most part, the guys I know that even do play Gibsons are playing. I got a friend who has a standard or a studio, and his is from 1978. He's the only owner. That's his one guitar. That is it. It's that jukebox hero, one guitar, strung way down low. Especially since he's only like 5'3". And it looks huge on him. I mean, I'm like, why don't you go to an SG? Like, no, I've always played this, and you can see it. I've shown pictures of it.
Yeah.
He's a really good guy, really, really nice guy. And but anyway, the guys I know, they don't lug standards in and out. They lug studios, and so the studio is kind of a misnomer. The other guy I know, I know a few guys that play SGs, but for the most part, the people I know, if they've got more than one guitar, they've got more than one Fender. One Gibson, more than one Fender.
I know. I know around here, I got a lot more attention when I was playing my SG. At one gig, no less, right? Like I went to one thing, and I had people coming up to me. Ooh, that's a nice Gibson or whatever. I've been playing Fenders for how long? Almost 10 years prior to that, and I don't think I ever got anybody come up and go, "That's a really nice Fender."
No,
like it's there's something about the Gibson, the Gibson mindset.
I think it's because the Fender is ubiquitous, so it's like it's a guitar.
So
I bet you, even among musicians, and this is the funny thing. So I can tell you that among musicians, most of them don't know Paul Reed Smith. They just don't. I can talk to 12 guitar players, and 8 of them won't know who Paul Reed Smith is, and the other ones have never heard of their guitars.
Maybe in your age group. I mean, mine.
Yeah.
No, it's like Fender and Gibson and Paul Reed Smith.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then if you take it a step further to, you got the sniffers. There's always a cork sniffer in the group, but for the most part, people don't even know who Paul Reed Smith is. I have to explain these birds to people who have been playing for 40 years.
Yeah.
And then you take the other side of it. So some friends of mine and I were hanging out at a club last night. All right. So 2 guys from England. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They grew up in England. Up to their teens, and then moved over here. So they've been here for 40 years, but before that, they were English. Then the other 2, one guy from Austin, Texas, and then myself from New York, we're all sitting there, and the only thing we all had in common was Fenders.
Yeah. Well, but a lot of that has to do with the price tag.
And the other guy, there was a 5th guy.
Okay.
And he had a Mira. And he's sending it back to PRS to have him look at it, but he has nothing bad to say about it. It's just there's something going on, and he wants to have him look at it. But anyway, all night long, Fender, and I'm just saying that, and that guy, local California, Virginian. So all I'm saying is it's this is piecemeal and little pieces. But for the most part, at least on the cover band circuit, or even these guys were originals last night, it's Fender. And so nobody's going to walk up to you and say, "That's an awesome Fender," because it's just a Strat. It doesn't matter what pickups you got in it. It doesn't matter what wood it's made of. They don't care if it's got what it is, unless it's got maybe like a the one guy had a whammy bar last. He had a floating, or locking bridge.
A Floyd.
Locking, Floyd on it. But other than that, nobody, they don't stand out, and neither do Telecasters. Nobody even notices I have 3 pickups until I go, and I got this third. Oh, wow, I didn't even see that. I'm looking right at it. I didn't even see it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Fender to me, and to a lot of people.
So here's the thing that I'm probably going to pull out that may not shock a lot of our listeners, but I don't think that people gig Gibsons anymore. Very, very few. I mean, like, obviously, so there are people I know that do. Like, obviously, Nick Bongers, he's a big Gibson guy, and he's got several. And he plays them out, and many of those are actually vintage guitars, or approaching vintage. And what's really funny about it is that I think a lot of the people who play Gibsons play them at home. They buy them, and they got 2 or 3 of them in their house, and they're not. Okay, so they're I want to say they're upper middle class, right? And I think that's where the vast majority of their money lies. Now, who do you think would be upper middle class in that age? Like, it's going to be that age group that we're talking about right now, but it's not the guys that are playing in bars for money. It's the guys that are playing in their house for fun, right?
For the most part, a person I'm rehearsing tomorrow with a new group of people that the guy that's starting this thing is upper middle class. He's quite wealthy, but for the most part, we're all middle class, middle class.
Right.
So if you take the income level, let's say $90,000, $90,000. I don't call that upper middle class at all. So if you took that group of people, we're not out spending that much money on our guitars for the most part, right?
No.
And so if you look at the age group, though, I think that's, like you said, that's really where their market lies. So they don't, for the most part, people of my age, they don't listen to podcasts. They could care less.
No.
And they are not watching YouTube channels. They don't have a YouTube feed.
Nope.
They could give a flying rat's ass about Mark Agnesi's
No, they
video.
don't even know that happened.
No. Matter of fact, just because I'm a people person, I'm a people watcher, I like to ask. I asked, hey, you guys hear about the Dean or the Marshall Dean the Gibson Dean controversy?
Right.
You know what they said? What are you talking about? That was, what are you talking about? Nothing. They're not.
No.
And they could not care less. And the guys that I know that are playing Gibsons, like I said, they've been playing the same Gibson. The ones who do play them out have been playing that same Gibson since the 70s or early 80s.
Yeah.
They could care less. That guitar is a workhorse. It's beat to shit. They don't care, excuse my language, they don't care about another ding, that it's not the top they're worried about. All these beautiful tops that you see in Guitar Center or Sweetwater or whatever, that's not for a person that's playing out, because the last thing you want is somebody to spill a beer on it.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a church player, I want to separate myself, because I'm not because I wouldn't, but because I don't.
You've done it.
Right, I've done it. That's where I can play my Gibsons. But if you think I want to play where I'm going to get beer spilled on them, or somebody, I had people throwing ping pong balls. I just don't want scratches.
Yeah. So, and that's a whole other conversation, because I think I feel that way about a lot of my guitars, but I've just gotten to the point where it's like, you know what? Every ding tells a story, and I don't care anymore. The only guitar that I actually did care about, I sold. It's boxed up behind me right now, and that's that Gibson SG. And that's more or less because it was a Gibson. Like, in the back of my mind, like when I was a kid growing up, and starting on playing guitar, I was like, I want to get a Gibson. At some point in my life, I'm going to have a Gibson. And I bought it, and I was like, I don't understand. Like, I just don't really understand the whole allure of this. And that's why I said, like, my generation, I don't think cares as much about brand names and that kind of thing, which is why... No. Which is funny, because I don't obviously want to play something with an Epiphone label on the headstock, but I don't know that I'll ever own another Gibson. And to be honest with you, if they don't change their marketing model, I don't know that anybody will own a Gibson in 20 years unless it's vintage. Because and until they start marketing to a broader spectrum of people, you got to understand something about the baby boomers who've been buying these guitars. They're retiring. They're going on fixed incomes. which means in the next 5 to 10 years, when the vast majority of them are out of the workforce, no one's going to have cash to spend on Gibsons.
That's right.
And the rest of us who do have a little bit of money right now are going to be paying higher taxes to take care of the baby boom. So that's a whole, like, this is an economic downturn question. And that's essentially what I'm talking about here is, what do we do when the price of a product keeps going up, but the amount of money that you're going to have keeps going down? Because that's where we're headed. Which means that a company like Gibson, if you're going to continue to produce $2,500 guitars that are your quote-unquote standard, how are you going to stay afloat? I mean, honestly, I can see my income shrinking in the next 10 years to the point where I won't buy guitars over $700 or $800. I could see myself getting there. And obviously right now I'm selling a $1,000 guitar behind me. I have a $1,500 S500 next to me, and I have a $1,500 Kiesel behind me as well. I'm no stranger to paying good money for guitars, but I'm getting to the point in my life where I'm like, I just can't see myself doing this anymore. And as I get older and the paychecks don't keep getting that much larger, I'm like, this kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Whereas the generation prior to us, you guys got raises when you were young, at least, and you made career moves that were giving you, significantly more money, plus inflation and all that, like all the different things that happened between, like I'm thinking about my parents specifically, between 1970 and 2019, my dad's still working. He's probably going to be retiring this year. Just thinking about the amount of money that he made when he started versus the amount of money he makes now, like, I don't see those kinds of increases happening to me in the 40 years I'm in the workforce. I have seen maybe a 15% increase since I got my first good gig. Total.
I haven't had a raise in 2 years.
Yeah. So
it's a reality that a lot of us face and a lot of us are facing. So I'm looking at a career change soon. But the fact is that there's a lot of things that we're doing as a society that makes the price points of Gibson guitars especially unrealistic for almost all of the market. And by taking that out, by removing so many people from it, we've talked about this before, they still don't have that guitar that can compete with, as we talked about, the de facto Strat.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a Les Paul that competes with a Stratocaster. Nowhere.
No.
Nowhere. You can look at the Tribute model and you could say, oh, well, we got the Tribute. But that's saying the bare bones, that's not apples and apples. Our bare bones guitar to your high end guitar.
I still laugh because
at least high upper middle end.
There's so many things that, like, Gibson over the years. Another podcast mentioned this, and I don't recall exactly who, but they said, Gibson really hasn't done much since the 1960s in terms of design innovation. And I mean, really, between 1970, most of the models that they sell today were designed pre-1970. Think about that. 335s, SGs, Les Pauls.
They're pre-64.
Yeah. I mean,
they're pre-64. I mean, when you think about it, the SG was 1960 or 61. Was it 61? I think it might have 61. So you're looking at the SG being a 61 model. You've got the Les Paul being the early 50s model, okay? And nobody really wants anything past the Les Paul standard.
All right. So I want to kind of take a step back from this. I want to say something personal opinion here. I don't want anybody who's listening to me and my comments about Gibson, the brand, and all of that to think for a second that I don't like the company. Like, I may not like the company because of the way it's being run right now, but I do like the guitars. Like, I played Les Pauls and SGs and all that stuff over the years, and some of the, I mean, I got an SG that I'm selling behind me. I'm not selling it because it says Gibson on the headstock. I'm selling it because I need to make room for something else. And I have tremendous respect for those designs. I do think there are some little problems, But you know what bothers me and boggles my mind the most is that Gibson has this mentality over there that like they have to do everything the old school way as much as possible, right? Yet they're CNCing bodies. So it's like, well, which is it? I personally, I don't care how you make the guitar as long as it's good, right? So that means you have to CNC the body, plec the neck, make sure, do all the stuff you have to do to make the quality higher and lower the cost. If you want hide glue and a guitar that was shaped by hand and a hand carved top, go to the custom shop. Those guitars are for you. Those guitars are not for the people who actually like want to be able to take a guitar to the club and play, a 12-song set or a 14-song set and not have to worry about the guitar getting beer spilled on it or, those kinds of things. Like, I personally, I don't care. I would go buy a $2,500 Les Paul Standard and then gig it until the damn thing falls apart. Because that's how I am. Like, guitars are meant to be played. If I pay for it, I'm going to play it. I don't worry about what they look like anymore. My guitars are in good shape. I just don't really, they're in good shape because I don't beat them up. That's basically what it is. But if I was out, gigging, I'm sure my guitars would look awful, which is fine. Like that, as long as they're playable and they sound good, like I don't care. So I'm not that person for sure, but, I think they need to get away from the idea of like, we've got to do it all traditional. Dude, tradition's over. Like you cannot be producing the guitars today the same way you did in 1970. You're not that company. You are a Fortune 500 publicly traded company. What are you doing? Because Fender figured that out a long time ago. Maybe Fender gets away with it because of the Model T of guitars. But, something's got to give here. Now Nick is going to send me a bunch of hate mail.
No, there are people who still want that. But so you've got to tell me. So I'm what they call, I'm at the very tail end of depending on who you talk to. I'm actually outside of that, but the tail end of the baby boomer. So I was born in the mid '60s. So there are some things that tell you that that's what Gen X or something.
Baby boomers are between 55 and 75 years old today. So between 1944 and 1964.
Yeah. So I'm a baby boomer.
You would be like what? Towards the tail end of that though, right?
I'm a tail end, the very tail end.
Yeah.
I was born
So
in
you
64,
you could be conceivably the generation after, like.
Right. Whatever that was. I don't remember what that's called. Generation X, I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah. I use the generational nomenclature, but the reality is I just mean the people that like they were in the workforce back then and have continued to make money over the years. That's all I meant.
Right. So if you're looking at someone who's younger than me, when is millennial? So a millennial would be, you would be a millennial, right?
Yes, correct.
You would be,
I'm on the tail end.
So they're born between when and when?
Let me look it up because I want to make sure that we're using acceptable years. So millennials were born between 1981 and 1996, and I was born in 84.
So my daughter's at the tail end of the millennials. All right. So if you look at those numbers and that just I guess the stuff that we're talking about, that someone who was born in, what'd you say, 1980?
1981, I believe.
Yeah. So in other words, someone who would be young enough to be my kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I turned 21 in 85. So you're looking at, it just makes sense that, except for the tail end of that. When were you born? 87?
I was born in 84.
84, okay. So you were born in 84. You're towards the beginning of that, which means you're one of the older millennials.
Right.
So you have an income that would depending on where you lived and so on and so forth, that would be okay with buying a Gibson.
Yeah, I mean, I could own 2 of them. I mean, or 3 of them. I mean, and I could buy one conceivably every other year. But would I do that? Because in all actuality, like, I'm not just playing guitar. And the other thing is, like, I like amps and stuff too. So, and I think people need to realize, like, that the culture that came before us didn't have this plethora of other devices that got used to make music. Right? Think about music in the 1970s. Like, when you heard a phaser on a record, it was like, whoa, you know? Nowadays, like, that stuff's so common. You know, your guitar playing kit has, like, increased massively. I can remember seeing guys, you know, when they'd show their rigs and magazines or whatever, when I had the old guitar players, I'd get the secondhand shop, and it would be like literally like, they wouldn't even have an overdrive. It would be like a wah pedal and like an amplifier. Yep. You sit there and shake your head. You're like, what?
Tom Schultz was the Edge of my day.
Yeah.
So he was the guy from Boston, for those who don't know who Tom Schultz is. So he would have all the stuff on his tracks. But most people were more like Angus Young, you know, and they may or may not have a delay. And if they did, believe it or not, folks, they were mostly on. If they had a delay pedal live, it was pretty much on all the time.
Yep.
And that's because they didn't have a lot of it. So it didn't really mess with the rhythm that much. So you'd have a boost, which sometimes either included, believe it or not, hitting another head.
Yeah.
And you'd have 2 heads going. Or they would, you know, because most, you know, the master volumes was what, 70s when those came about?
Yeah, early 70s.
So of those guys that I was talking about last night, all but 2 of us had an amplifier they bought in the 60s or had that was built in the 60s. So that just shows you, and those 2 amplifiers, they were both, what brand do you think they were?
Fenders.
They were both Fenders. One was a twin.
You know why I know that? Because if you bought an amp in the 60s here in the United States, you bought a Fender.
Yep, it was a twin reverb. Well, the guy from England, but he bought his in the 70s, but it was still a 60s Silverface.
Yeah, because they're probably just sitting over there.
Yeah. Or it was a black. Which one's older, Silverface or Blackface?
The Silverface are newer. Blackface is older.
Okay, Blackface. It's a Blackface circuit and a Silverface. They were. His is like a transition.
They transition, right? Because the first year they were still using the same circuit, which if I recall is an AB763. Someone correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's the one he was talking about. So they both had one of those, and so that, I mean, just saying. Yeah,
I mean, that's a holy grail amp for me. I've because I'm thinking it because I've bought the Kemper and I'm like talking about I'm keeping it for the next 3 years and I'm definitely going to keep it for that long. It has not changed one iota in my worldview. I could see myself mustering the cash to buy a vintage deluxe reverb when I come out of this.
But do you know that neither one of them has kicked that amp in years?
Oh yeah, no. This would be an at-home amp. This is not one I would take out anywhere. It would be for me and my personal enjoyment in the house.
Yep. But we did all say none of us were able to warm up to really using a modeler on stage.
Yeah.
That was everybody.
It's
still hard.
The only one that I found that works is the Kemper.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it's a snapshot. Yeah. I mean, Jeff and I sat down last weekend at Good Time, and we plugged my Kemper into a 2x12 vertical recto cab, right? And we were both pretty impressed, I think, with some of the sounds that they gave me in the box. But I mean, like, he and I, we're tube snobs. Like, let's be honest. We know that it's not the same thing, but we know it's, right. But we also kind of know it's good enough. And it's like, well, if I can push the cab hard enough, and it's got 600 watts, so that's a no-brainer. it should be the same. I mean, it really should.
Yeah.
The only difference, of course, is that, you know, I'm not using any cab modeling, and I still think it's a big hurdle for a lot of the older generation in modeling, like, is to understand exactly how to use it, because these devices are not simple, right? I mean, you can spend hours in the Helix just messing around with things and like dialing in, you know, the right amount of power amp sag and stuff like that. But who wants to do that? And for the generation prior that like, but let me put it in perspective for you, right? We all have somebody in their between the ages of 50 and 70 who's got an iPad or an iPhone that we have to help them out with regularly. You're podcast listeners. I'm assuming that you have enough wherewithal that you're probably the guy or gal that gets asked to, you know, help sort out these issues with somebody else. So think about that for a minute. Those are the same people that are buying high-end gear, right?
That's right.
So the modeling stuff, like, of course, I could definitely see guys that have AB 763 deluxe reverbs sitting there, or twins sitting at home, like going, yeah, modeler doesn't work live.
I have an interesting perspective that is only a guess as well. I'm wondering, older folks who have been playing for a long time and have a lot of stage time, especially in my era, didn't exactly take care of their hearing.
That's a good part of it.
I'm wondering if the reason that the modeler doesn't make the cut is because of that right there. What we're talking.
Yeah, they like, so people who cannot hear the high frequencies probably pay more attention to the low mids and the lower stuff and the actual thump that you get from something. I'll tell you this. I had my Kemper in my Mark V, like back to back, right? Literally just pulling the cable out, swapping it over to my cab, which is probably not good, but I was hitting the standby in between, right? So hopefully my stuff's good. But I did this, and I couldn't tell the difference when the volumes were equal. But I'll tell you what. The Kemper can sound just as loud without the volume actually being equal, which is a weird phenomenon because the speakers weren't pushed as hard, right? And I could tell the difference. I was like, well, this doesn't sound as good as I thought it would. And then I turned it up, and I was like, oh, there it is, speaker breakup, like, and it just came alive, and I was like, okay, so yeah, this is the end. But I think a lot of it. So I know that people are gonna poo-poo this, but because nobody wants to hear that their ears suck or that they're wrong. But the reality is that there is a bias that goes on with this stuff because we've been told there's a bias to go on with this stuff, right? There's certainly a psychological piece of using an amplifier versus using a digital apparatus.
I'm going to agree with that to a point. I'm also going to agree if someone told me that an older person isn't willing to spend the time to dial in tones on a piece of equipment that's digital, because just like you were talking about, if you've got to help them with an iPad, imagine the amount of assistance you'd have to give them with a Kemper.
Oh, it'd be nightmare. It would be nightmarish.
Right. And they would never understand. They just, because I see it all the time. Screw it. Just give me my old stuff. I don't care. I just want the old stuff. I want it the way it used to be. I don't care. And I've been there.
I have too.
When I got to that point, I was like, all right, Jim, shut up and settle down, because you've got to realize that if you don't listen to yourself, you're going to sound stupid. And you really sound stupid right now when you're doing this. So, yeah, I have to agree that there are times when I do the same thing. I go, all right,
so
I don't want to try it. I just don't want to try it. Matter of fact, that's what's kept me for years and years going to 100%, because I just.
So there's a bias to it.
I can't give it up.
There's a bias to it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's fine. I don't think anybody's going to fault anybody for like, sticking to what they know, right? That's I would anticipate that 95% of the pros out there would not be looking at something like the Kemper to replace what they've been using and relying on for the last, however long their career's been. Because let's face it, that's pretty much, how most guitar players operate. Like, you're not going to go up to Angus Young and convince him that he should use a Kemper, right? Like, it's never going to happen. Even if I could get this thing to sound just like his KT66 loaded Marshalls, it's never going to happen.
Nope.
And
not in a million years. That is a guy who won't change the brand of batteries.
Yeah, dude, like, I'm sure he's probably still wearing the same underwear he toured with 40 years ago too.
I bet you that's the same hat.
Yeah,
he's been wearing
probably the same schoolboy outfit, It's like
his sister made him back then.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to poo-poo anybody that does the traditionalist thing, and like, I get it.
No.
In fact, some of the best amp sounds you're ever gonna find are in those traditional senses. Going back to those old vintage things, like I've heard a lot of vintage amps over the years, and the ones that come to mind are the ones that were like old and beat up and really good. I don't remember as much of the new stuff I've played. And I think there's a lot to be said about character, but I also think, just like in guitars, we attach a lot of significance to something being old, not something being good. And we've had this conversation on the show before where people are like, oh, vintage Fender. Listen, 70s era Fenders are garbage. Most of them are awful. There might be 1 out of 10 that's worth it. And the prices of them are getting to the point where it's like, what?
Actually, you're pushing it from 69 forward.
Well, I would think,
was it 69 or was it 70?
The first couple of years of CBS production were okay.
Because it was leftover parts from the Fender production.
Well, that's part of it, but I think it's also the fact that, like, they still had some of the same people working there, and that kind of stuff. And like, after the handover, like with any company, a period of time passes, and of course, many of those people have moved on. That the company has changed designs, they've changed the product line. Like, that's what it ultimately comes down to. In Fender's case, they just clearly did not have a handle on what the market wanted, which is why the company was like heading for bankruptcy and everything else.
That's right.
So, I mean, look at their amplifiers. They went to the Silverface line, and then they just tried to make everything as loud and as clean as possible in the heyday of hair metal. Like, what were they thinking? What were they thinking?
Well, you know what? The Fender, if you remember, Fender was, Gibson was jazz, and jazz was nose in the air. And as much as people want to call PRS the doctor lawyer thing, Gibson was the doctor lawyer.
No, Gibson is still the doctor lawyer thing.
That's right, and it's still. Where Fender had a foothold in the people like Hank Marvin and the country western folks like James Burton, and so Gretsch had a handle on the jazz box guys too. So you look at jazz Gretsch prices. Now, people who think, Fender is Gretsch is not Fender. For those who don't know, Fender
it's just distributed by them.
Distributes it. It is still owned by the Gretsch family. But anyway, so the Gretsch, the Fenders were back then and just to today, they were the budget guitar. Yep. They really were. And so if you look at it, Fender was country western. Country western did not go hard in the 80s. As a matter of fact, you had bands. What were your big 80s country bands? So you had Alabama. You had Garth Brooks.
Late 80s, really.
Yeah, but let's see. Early 80s was, the guys who were backing up people like Kenny Rogers.
Yeah.
Not Tom Jones. What's the guy's name? Jones. He had He Stopped Loving Her Today. And
I can't remember.
And you had Conway Twitty was still going, and you had Dolly Parton was still going. You had
it was a lot of legacy acts from the prior generation that were still like doing it.
Yeah, because they hadn't done. It was Garth Brooks, Alan Jackson, Brooks and Dunn, those guys that kind of brought in. That was when what's that guy, the hot telly player now,
Paisley.
Huh?
Paisley?
No, not Paisley.
I was gonna say he's like he's a little bit later. He's like another 5 years down the road.
The guy that was on all those albums. I mean, he was on all. Oh crap! Not James Burke. His Brian Mason. So you had Brian Mason. Brian Mason was the voice of Fender. So, in other words, what hung Fender in the, you remember they were going under, like you said, but they didn't ride that wave, which actually helped them later, because when guys like Brian Mason came out, and then people saw the guys from Brooks and Dunn, they were wearing what? Fenders. Alan Jackson was wearing a Fender. And the guys behind Alan Jackson were Fenders, and the guys behind Garth Brooks were playing Fenders. And so those people were the popular musicians of the time, especially when people who weren't really grunge fans jumped off of rock as it moved out of heavy metal, hair metal, into that weird, way of we want to get rid of solos. But a lot of people still liked it, and so they were out there watching bands like that. Who's his name? Crap. It's terrible. I can't remember all these names.
You don't need to remember. It's fine. I'd rather not.
But it's just all these but all these telly players and all these Strat players that were making it cool. And the thing was that a lot of let's look at the guys my age, right? We're going into our 30s now, and here comes these guys playing Fenders. And who was our favorite Fender player? That was Stevie Ray Vaughan, right up through 94, right? He passed away in 94.
No, he died in 89.
Or 91.
In 91, yeah, I think it was 91.
Yeah, I think it was 91. August or September of 91. So we had Stevie Ray Vaughan, we had Jimi Hendrix, we had Eric
It was
Clapton.
1990, August 27th.
Oh, 90. Okay, so even earlier. So you've got all these folks that we were fans of, because I turned 30 in 94. So I'm heading into my 30s. I'm still wanting to hear solos. And right at 1990, that's when, we had the Fabulous Thunderbirds. We had all that.
Yeah.
And all I'm trying to say is that Fender had a foothold still in those players that never left, and that's there's something to be said for that.
No.
I honestly, I think.
I think we're kind of doing a disservice to comparing like Gibson and Fender here, because they really we've established on the show before that they're not the same thing, and number two, they don't have the same audience. Number three, the only reason we would be comparing them is because the business size, right? They're the two biggest companies in musical instruments, probably musical instruments, period, right?
Yeah.
Maybe next to somebody like I would suspect that there's probably, a hidden big company out there, somebody like Behringer or somebody like Yamaha, right? This is just thinking that may actually be bigger because they have a hand in the piano business, or they do pro audio as well. But basically, as far as guitars are concerned, these two companies are it, right? And it's funny because you stop and think, pretty much every design on the market is somehow derivative of something Fender or Gibson had done. Either it's a 2 single coil pickup style guitar a la Dan Electro, which is kind of a knockoff of, American style guitars of the time, being Telecasters and Stratocasters and things like that. And then you've got, Supro, which was kind of also in that vein. And you have, if you start going into the more modern stuff, you've got, all these different brands that have basically done complete Fender, here's our version of a Fender, right? And the same thing's happened with Gibson, right, over the years. And we've got companies like Dean, which, by the way, Dean started off making copies of Gibson guitars originally.
That's right.
God, I'd love to see that paperwork, because something just occurred to me. So we all know Dean's changed hands 6 times, right? And I think the company that owns it now hasn't owned them very long. And I'll bet you they had an agreement or an arrangement with prior companies. I would love to see that court paperwork, because I have a feeling
Yeah.
that everybody out there with their armchairs right now saying pundits, those same pundits are saying, oh, well, they should have sued him 40 years ago. If you ain't seen the paperwork, you may not know they already did, and it never got to court. You may not know that they had a backdoor arrangement where somebody was paying them a licensing fee. That's very possible. Especially in this industry, paying somebody a little bit of money to make them go away. It's not unheard of. In fact, I've heard crazy dealings with other companies like PV in their Viper series of amps, hiring another company who makes another series of modelers, coming in and doing consulting work to design the Viper series for them. They hired a competitor to design an amp for them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how crazy this industry can be at times. So I would not be surprised at all to find out that there is a long history of behind closed doors negotiations between Dean and Gibson. And this is just the latest in a long line of like, we're not going to let this stand anymore. This is getting nuts. They're not the only company out there that's knocking off Gibson designs either. Even Yamaha in the early 2000s had a line of guitars, single cuts, that were very Les Paul like. And I think there's a little bit of people apprehensive about the fact that, of course, Fender has lost lawsuits against companies over the body shape, because they're like, well, the body shape's in the public domain. The only thing that matters is your headstock. That was a court ruling that Fender got at one point. But that doesn't mean that applies to Gibson. Okay?
No.
So, I mean, that's just it. We can sit here and we can discuss this more until we're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, it's a lawsuit. Court of law is going to have to figure it out. And, it may be good or bad for guitar players. Like, I honestly don't really give a damn about what happens to Dean. I don't think Dean has never been a guitar company I've been interested in. I just have never picked up a Dean that I liked. And I don't think they make guitars that really appeal to me. So if something happened to Dean, no big deal.
That's got to be the ugliest headstock outside of maybe a couple.
That BC Rich would be a company I'd be more concerned about, but I think BC Rich has not had a renaissance yet. So we've seen this already, Jim, where a guitar company makes a bunch of designs and they're super popular when they come out and everybody's excited about them, and then for 20 years nobody buys them. And then all of a sudden there's this nostalgia thing, and it's like, I want that guitar. And that's what's going on with Kramer right now, and that's what's going on with Charvel right now. And
that's right, because people my age are all of a sudden, they're in their 50s and they want one because they
didn't have one when they were a kid. They wanted one, but they didn't have one. They might have had a Tisco or something, And it's like, now I want that guitar that I always wanted.
Now I need a Kramer. Oh man, Kramer's, guys who never owned a Kramer, okay? People my age who never owned a Kramer all of a sudden need one because that was an awesome guitar. They don't know. They don't know that most of those things were modded and set up to within an inch of their lives. They have no idea. They're just like, oh, but my Guitar Hero played one, so it must be good. So I got to go get one.
Yeah, or maybe they played one when they were a kid at the store and they were like, oh, I got to have one now. That stuff happens. And it's a lot more common than we could realize, which is why I think Fender is also sort of having a renaissance right now. Is if you look at what was the popular equipment in the grunge movement, it's Sonic Youth playing like, they were playing like the offsets and humbuckers, right? Which is a pretty common thing that Fender does now. You had guys like Kurt Cobain who was playing, the
jazz stain.
Well, he had that, but before he did the Jag-Stang thing, which I don't think he actually ever owned one. He was playing Jazzmasters a lot and Jaguars a lot. He also had and played on most of the live stuff where you could see him, like physically see him. He's playing Stratocasters with humbuckers in them.
Yeah.
And or single coils, and that whole movement, like those guys were buying those guitars because you could get them for cheap in the pawn shop. A lot of them were 70s. And as we said, 70s was not a great era for Fender, but
yeah, they were getting them for, pennies on the dollar.
So what would end up happening is like you've got this whole generation who now 25 years down the line have enough buying power to actually drive an industry, and they're going, I want the guitars that the guitar heroes that I liked were playing.
So here's an interesting story. I was speaking to one of the guys last night who was from Austin, Texas. Who were we talking about earlier?
Stevie Ray.
From Austin, Texas. That's right.
Stevie Ray and Eric Johnson from Austin, Texas, and ZZ Top as well.
My friend's 66 years old. Now he used to go to the store that sold Stevie Ray the guitar. Famously turned into number one. Now that's not a big deal. It's not a story. I mean, everybody's been to that. Yeah, and a lot of people have been to that store in the past, but he was going there at the same time. But of course, Stevie Ray Vaughan was just another dude playing guitar at that time. But the funny thing is, the guy that sold that guitar to the store was Christopher Cross.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So that's the dude. Now, here's the interesting thing that I want to say about the guitars that are famous throughout history. Most of them are not top shelf guitars. That Strat that Stevie Ray Vaughan
it was kind of a throwback.
Not a top shelf Strat. Right. It was a throwback, but not a top shelf. If you think about it, way back in the 60s, I say way back, in the 60s when these Strats were being built, and the 50s, what was the year the Strat first got introduced? 56?
57.
55? 57? Okay. I knew it was mid-50s. So when they were putting these together, nobody knew at that time I'm putting together a guitar that might be worth tens of thousands of dollars later. They just knew they were doing their job. So if you look at the guitar that Jimi Hendrix played two guitars one night. One he burned. He burned it because it would not stay in tune. It was pissing him off. So he laid it down and he burned it, right? A whole bunch of stories as to why. But one of them was that. The point is that these things weren't cherished. They were used. And then you take Kurt Cobain. What was his guitars before they started building the jack stands for it? It was just pawn shop Strats and
Univox's high flyers.
Yeah. So, and if you look at Stevie Ray Vaughan, like I said, he bought a guitar at a pawn shop. Not a pawn shop, but a guitar shop that just happened to come in, and it was good timing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It could have been anybody else that walked into that shop, but it was him that got this guitar that became number one. So if you look at the guitars through history, I don't care who you look at. David Gilmour didn't buy that black Strat because it was famously, it was just interesting.
Yeah, he didn't know it was going to be it was going to sell for $3 million.
Yeah, $3.8 million, some ridiculous thing like that. And I guess, what was it? The guy that owns the Colts or something bought it?
That wouldn't.
Or the Broncos?
Who cares?
One of the two. And he said he's going to play.
Yeah, right. It's going in a vault.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool if he plays it. Then he'll put it away. Yeah, then he'll put it in a vault.
Pump all the air out and, kill the soul.
But the point is that, none of these guitars were infused with some special magical medium. It's just a guitar that felt good and sounded good at the time. And you make of it what you put into it. So I'm looking at the Harley Benton. So I'm switching gears. That's what I was doing. So I'm going to have to buy this Harley
I forgot
Benton
that you were going to buy one, right? I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I am.
I almost forgot about that.
Next couple weeks. So I am going to order one. I don't know how long it take. I don't really care. Point is, I am going to order it. I'm going to get that gold
top of the P90s?
SC. Yeah, 450. They call it the SC. I imagine that single cup. 450 P90 GT Classic Series gold.
Right.
Gold. And so, yes, I'm going to do it. So you guys can make fun of me at that point.
I'll make fun. No, I'm not. I won't do that to you.
You're not going to make fun.
No, because I have a red unicorn.
Because you have the red unicorn. Plus, I mean, you've played them, so you know whether or not they're
I consciously considered getting the Fusion.
That's another one I consider.
If they did did Fusions in flat colors, I'd be like, all right, I'm game. I'll try it.
Yeah.
But they don't.
Why is it? What turns you off about the color schemes that they're using now?
Ugly, man. Hey, let me see if I can pull it up while we're talking. So they have a couple of different versions of the Fusion, but the one that I see commonly is like this photo flame thing that's ugly. And then they also do
The HH?
Yeah, that's the HSH, but
Okay.
they do like pretty much every possible configuration of pickups you could want to win. The green is ugly. The clean that clear is not great looking. The red is okay.
The purple looks all
I could do
right.
the red.
Yeah, I would do the red.
And it's got a go-to on it. I should not be looking at this right now.
Yeah, I like
Nothing
the
for 3
I like
years.
The purple.
Nothing for 3 years.
The FPU doesn't look
Nothing
bad.
for 3 years, except for this. I mean, nothing for 3 years.
That's right. Except for this guitar right here.
No, I need a 7-string, so that pretty much counts the Fusion out. Although I could probably just email them and they'd be like, "Yeah, we'll make you a 7-string."
I'm sure. They don't make a 7-string.
No, not in the Fusion. No.
Yeah, so I'm looking at that guitar because obviously P90 thing. Of course, the pickups probably won't stay. Probably.
No, they won't. That's my opinion. They won't.
Yeah, but if the guitar feels good, I'm definitely not going to for $200, less than $200 actually, even with shipping. I'm not going to send it back.
No. I mean,
I wish I could find one on like what's the Reverb,
You know what? You're going to be pleasantly surprised. 'Cause I think it's going to be slightly better than you think it is. It's going to be like your Affinity Telly. Which, by the way, have you installed those Telly pickups that Nick sent you yet?
No, I got to do that.
Yeah, you definitely got to get.
Man, I have been. Oh yeah, I have been.
Sorry, Nick.
Yesterday, so the funny part is, I'm sorry, Nick. Yesterday I got stung all up my arm.
What?
This whole arm, yeah. I was mowing my lawn, and I had stuck my hand in, to move some brush.
There's a beehive.
Beehive that I didn't even know I had. Just all up my arm. It was
Screw
terrible.
that.
Seriously.
Screw that. Did you go to the emergency room?
No, I'm not allergic.
You sit there and scrape out all the stingers?
Hurt like crazy. Yeah. So I had to sit down and scrape. And it still itches like crazy.
Oh, yeah. It's going to for days. Take some Benadryl.
It's like having a what do you call that? Poison there. Poison ivy. I'm not allergic to poison ivy either. So it's one of those things. I can literally stick my hand in poison ivy and it wouldn't bother. But most people are allergic to it, so it's not great. Yeah. Anyway, the Harley Benton is something that I am going to order here in the next couple weeks or so. So when it comes in, we'll see. I gotta get my hands on a what do you call it? A soldering iron.
Would it kill Toman to actually give us like a color like selector?
I know, right? You gotta click.
I mean, it's ridiculous. Their website is awful.
It is. Their website is terrible. Toman, fix your website, please.
This is.
This is ridiculous. Steal, just like you stole the body styles of the guitars. Steal the code from Guitar Center's website or Sweetwater's website, better yet, and give us the ability to hover over the other color and see it in something other than a thumbnail. Literally the size of a thumbnail. Give us.
Yeah, I mean, like, how am I supposed? I can't even see the color on these things.
Oh, and I'm also looking at the Black Classic. You know what's funny is the SC 450 BK Classic is cheaper by $20. Isn't that weird? Or no? Yeah, $19 than the gold top. The black one is cheaper than the gold top.
Dude, I can't believe they want $440 for a Harley Benton Fusion with a roasted maple neck.
I know, that's crazy. Yeah, but you're paying for the neck.
Okay, BS.
Seriously,
BS.
You're paying for them.
BS.
Come on, you're paying for them to order a Warwick maple neck. That's what they talk. That's a Warwick neck all day
I could be
long.
completely honest with you. I have a hard time thinking about ordering a $400 Chinese guitar. It's like, what?
So I'm saying. So I was watching to shift gears a little bit. I was watching a video from. We mentioned it last week from Anderton's, and they're giving away a guitar that they modded the living crap out of, right? And it's not the one that they modded at Toman that you saw.
No, right.
With, what's his face? He came back to Anderton's, and they modded the crap out of this Squire. And so they took everything out. It was a really good playing Squire. Took everything out. They put all the stuff in. And then they side-by-sided it with a Player Series.
Right.
Because the Player Series was in the exact same price. By that point, the Squire would cost more than the Player Series. Here's what's funny. They both agreed the Player was better. And then, actually, after they got done paying for all this stuff in it, then they played a Squire, the same Squire. They just pulled one off the rack, played a Squire. They were like, yeah, kind of is better without all the junk in it. So they're still giving it away, but they actually liked it
in a stock configuration.
In a stock configuration. It was funny. Both of them liked it in a stock configuration. Now, of course, Anderton is, and he admits it. He is a straight up Fender dude, and he loves his Strats. He's a Strat guy. But what I thought was most interesting about that whole thing was, this is what Anderton said, and we've said this before. Like you were just talking about, I wouldn't pay $450 for a Chinese guitar.
A Harley Benton Fusion. Not a Chinese guitar, but a Harley Benton Fusion.
Yeah, Harley Benton Fusion. Same thing.
Yeah.
Because it is a Chinese guitar, let's face it. The fact is that you could put $10,000 worth of stuff into a Squire. It's still worth a Squire price when you go to sell it.
Well,
he said, you are not getting more out of it. So you are better off pulling all the stuff out. That's why they said, make sure you save all your stuff, pull it back out, put your original stuff back in, then get rid of it, and then sell the other stuff off as you can.
I don't know. I'm just not a big part of the mod community. Like, I've done mods to guitars over the years as well. Yeah. And I just feel like a lot of the time, yeah, it becomes very player specific and player centric, and like you can Lego brick a guitar together if you really want to.
Yeah.
But I feel,
of course, you could Warwick. Didn't Bizadecki recently?
He did a Warmoth. He did a Warmoth.
Yeah.
And it's great, but the thing is, he's he ordered that as a player. It's the same thing as like ordering a Kiesel.
Right.
It's literally the same thing. And he knew that was going to be a player's instrument. And I think if you're buying guitars sheerly based on the value, like, you're doing it wrong. Because we're players. Like, this is a player's podcast. This is not about...
Right, we've talked about that before, yeah.
But at the same time, I get it. I mean, a lot of people buy a guitar thinking, in 3 years I'm going to upgrade. I'm going to get, if I'm still playing guitar, especially if you're a beginner, if I'm still playing guitar, then I'll sell this one off and get another one. Which they quickly realize that, no, I'm not going to sell this one off. I'm just going to have 5 more.
Right.
You know what I don't understand? And
that's the point I was making, though, is that if you're buying that Squire and then expecting to trade it in 2 years, then you put $300
don't put parts in it. Just don't. You don't have to.
Right. Exactly. You don't have to.
There was a time where you did. You weren't going to play out with a Squire Affinity. Like, it just wasn't going to happen because the tuners were not going to work right, and all kinds of other like little gotchas, like the pots.
Okay.
Back in the early stuff, like, it was way worse though, Jim. I can tell you right now, I like having picked up Affinities and stuff recently. They're not the same thing as what they were. I mean, I got an Affinity P bass hanging in the bedroom, and it is garbage, hot garbage. Being the case, though, like, the pickups have gotten better, and that's really like the big equalizer. I think the old Squire pickups from like the mid late 90s were pretty awful. And now that they're better, like there's no reason to have to spend all that money to upgrade the guitar. Maybe do new tuners. That's it.
Yeah, that's the only thing that honestly,
Maybe.
that's the only thing that I really, really need to change on that guitar. The
Well-
tuners. And it's not because they're awful. I can tune them. It's just they're not me good. Does that make any sense? They're good enough, just not quite good enough for Jim.
You're used to using a higher class tuner, and so it's not like it's just not going to be cohesive enough for you. My whole thing is like, so if I was to take like an Affinity Series guitar, right? Let's say I go to the store and I buy an Affinity Telly.
Right.
Now, I've heard they're doing alder bodies now, but they were doing agathis before, and agathis is like driftwood. Okay.
Yes.
Driftwood from another country, and I hear this stuff, and I'm like, you're gonna put. If we go, let's stop and rethink this. If we go through PRS's theory, right? Like you start off with a guitar that has all this potential, right? And you're using in the woods like that you put together have all this potential, based on the selection. Then you would want to do things that would maximize what you're going to get out of the actual physical properties of the wood. Because when you put in new pickups, you're not adding to the guitar, you're subtracting. Okay, so in this case, you're filtering, right, with pickups and that kind of thing. So when you're looking at a Telecaster, right, and you're looking at an Affinity Telly with an agathis body and whatever region of the world maple for the neck, and whatever rosewood, Palfaro, whatever's on that particular instrument.
Fretboard, if it has one of those. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that your $200 guitar is not going to have premium quality woods in it. And there might be some knots. There might be some dead spots that come about because of knots and things like that. And that's why I'm like, yeah, you can put new pickups in it, but why? Like, there are specific cases, like Dan Kish's Harmony. He's got a Harmony Stratocaster, which is probably late 70s, I would think. Where, yeah, it's a plywood body, but there's something going on with that guitar. Like, it just he got lucky, right? Like, he ended up with it was really good. Which, yeah, I'm sure that happens. But not everybody, because everybody mods their Squires, right? Like, not everybody has that kind of guitar. You know what I mean? Where they got lucky and they got one that was super good. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to throw money at a problem when you're only going to be able to get what's originally there, right? So if they're cutting costs on the wire and the pickups, and they're cutting costs on the switches, and they're cutting costs on the jacks, and they're cutting costs on the pick guards, and they're cutting, you understand what I'm saying? Like, you're not getting the same quality of wood either. It's just not going to happen. So I just think that modding a $250 guitar and expecting it to be a $500 or $1,000 guitar is just crazy. However, like, to each their own. If you find the right combination of parts for your instrument that does what you want it to do, I'm not gonna stop you. I'm not gonna tell you no either. But for me and my tastes, like, I would rather start with better quality wood, and then maybe, so I think if you start with better quality wood, you might not need as good as pickups. Like, I know I poo-poo Epiphone all the time, but if you've ever played like a $500 or $600 Epiphone, you know that they're a step above an Affinity, right? They're not an Affinity Telly. And even though the pickups aren't great, they're like a little hot, a little overwound, a little bit muddy. They're passable. You could gig with them. The old Squire Affinities, you couldn't. It was like playing a rattle can, of spray paint. That's the way I think of it anyway.
Yeah, well, again, when you're putting it, we all talk about, oh, well, not all of us, but there's that whole, oh, well.
Well, those who sniff corks, me.
Yeah. The whiff, the wood doesn't matter in a guitar and blah, blah, blah. Well, if it didn't matter, then you could, you could make a guitar out of anything as long as it can hold the strings. So the fact is that there is something to be said about at least the quality of the wood and the ability to hold a pickup where it's not jangling about. Can I say that? And
everything matters in the construction of an instrument. The bolts
and
you
so
put through the neck matter. I mean,
yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I'm looking at the telly right now, right? And when you mentioned the wood, it is made of 6 pieces of wood, and I can see that.
Yep.
I mean, they're not hiding.
Yep.
Used to be they'd paint them black, paint them red. You didn't
solid
get
color
scotch or anything like that. And those things, they were solid colored for a reason. When they were making it out of that agatha stuff, they didn't want you to know that wood. If you took that paint off of those little things, you'd be frightened. You'd say, "Oh my God, what is this thing?
How did they put this together?"
How did they?
I saw
but that's
one.
Just it. The paint is holding it together, folks.
I saw one time that was literally made out of like 3/4 inch ply. It like sandwiched together. There was like 9 layers, and I'm sitting there going, "This can't be real."
Yep. I was going to say. So a friend of mine showed me. He had one that that came into the shop, and it got. He was a shop owner, and it got done up, so he was able to trash it. I'm using air quotes, people who can't see me. And so what he did was he stripped the paint off, and just what you were talking about, it looked like the press board they use for that cheap, $8 medicine cabinet or whatever you buy that when you were setting up your first apartment, you couldn't afford real furniture, so you bought a nightstand or whatever from Walmart.
That's even worse because that's like MDF, right?
And it was just like MDF. It was literally press board, and I said, "Oh my God, what in the heck is this?" He goes, "That's why they paint them in solid colors, because they don't want you to know
that it's like
that the wood underneath
wood shavings
doesn't even have grains.
It's wood shaving and glue."
Yeah, it doesn't even have grains. It's just crap, literally crap.
But the funny part is, like, that there are examples of those guitars that sound good. So that's just like the consistency was different on that day. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly. Or they got wood that day and they got press board the next day. You really don't know. That's why they use solid colors.
And I've actually seen some that were from the same time period as the one I saw that had, because it looked like the stuff they make cabinets out of, which is just regular old plywood, right? And it looked like that. It had grain in it, but it was like veneers glued together, right? And there was probably 8 or 9 of them, and
that thick with 8 or 9 layers.
And the body, of course, on the affinities back then, the bodies were slightly thinner. But then I saw another guy who would strip finish in a similar form, and his was like alder. It looked just like alder. I was like,
well, see,
what?
my understanding was that they were handling the overseas manufacturing much like Fender himself did, is that they don't throw parts away. So you take guitars, right, and you make them, right. You're planing wood all day long. Hey, what are you going to do with those shavings? What are you going to do with that? Grind
stuff? Them up, throw some glue in there,
put them together, and make one with it. Because you could be the fortunate person that got the not too bad guitar. You could be the less fortunate person that got a couple of layers.
Yeah, it's like playing the lottery.
Right. You were spinning it because you didn't know, because you couldn't see underneath all that red or the black. Typically they were red, black, and white.
So if we go back then, right? I've long suspected this, but I'll bet you the weight of those guitars varies dramatically. I'll bet you'll find affinity strats and tellies from that period 6 pounds all the way to 14 pounds.
Yeah. That were like 8-9 pounds.
I can remember picking up some that were really effing heavy. So.
Yep. And that's the tell. But the other side of the tell is how well they dried the wood. Did they give it the proper amount of time to dry?
Yeah.
Like we're talking about, if you've got a lot of board that's pressed together and you had to to press it, glue it, press it, glue
Oh
it,
yeah,
you're going to add a lot of weight.
right. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Like glue is heavier than wood, and that's why I said that would be like a 14-pound guitar. That one that I saw that was like sandwiched 8 layers or whatever,
Yeah.
that would have been like 14 pounds. It would have been nuts.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's kind of my fear with buying solid color guitars in general. You don't know what you're getting underneath there, because when you buy an inexpensive instrument, you know inherently they're trying to cut costs. And so if you're like one of these people that's like, oh, I'm just going to mod every guitar I get my hands on, and just I'll buy $200 guitars till I'm blue in the face and just put parts in them. Like, look, I get it. I know what you're trying to achieve. Buy the $500 guitar and put $200 worth of parts in it rather than buying the $200 guitar and putting $570 worth of parts in it. It just doesn't make sense. Save your money a little bit longer and buy the better guitar, because I think in the long run you'll be much happier putting good parts into a $500 guitar on down the road than you will doing the other thing. I've literally seen shops tell people like, we won't work on that because they're like no, it's just not worth your investment to keep it going. Now personally I kind of think that's pretty dodgy, but the store that I've seen do that around here is I'm surprised they're even in business. But
well, I could tell you if I was a maintenance person, I know that I used to go to the same guy all the time, right? Throughout the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and the person that took care of me would tell me, he'd say straight up, you know what, this is not worth it. Just get rid of it. He'd show me whether it was a neck problem or whatever, and I'm taking my acoustic in, have him take a look at it, because it's all about sentimental reasons. I told him, I said, look, I know there's no value in this guitar whatsoever. I couldn't sell it for $20 in the open market, but it's got some sentimental value. So if I could restring it, put a pickup in it, it could be my my guitar, because I intend on getting the Martin later next year. And so it's one of those things where, okay, if I put a couple $100 into this, then I can play it now and again. I can I go back to my youth, because I bought it when I was 21 years old.
Well, you and I always do the rental fee thing.
Right.
So I get that. And I'm not trying to tell people not to do the value thing. Like, there are obvious reasons why you want to do that. Jim, you have an affinity tally right now. Like, I bought inexpensive guitars. I will continue to buy inexpensive guitars at different times, depending on what my needs are at that moment. And
I'm gonna order Holly.
And I've got the Red Unicorn. Like, I put pickups in that, and I'm gonna put a bridge on it too, and I've already put tuners on it. It really just depends on like what your needs are. And I just want to make sure that people like are prepared for what they're getting into. Because I think a lot of people, especially when they first start on guitar, I've heard people say things like, I'm just going to build my own guitar. And you're like, have you ever built anything? What? Or I'm going to buy a kit. What? Right.
Well, there was a time when you could save money buying a kit.
Yeah.
And it was like, I want to put it like computers. There was a time when building a gaming computer made sense.
Yeah.
It costs a lot less money. We're talking in the hundreds to build your own gaming computer, right? You got the sound you wanted. You got the now doesn't make any sense at all.
Well,
you
can save money by building out of the box, but you're not going to save enough to make it worthwhile.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say. Not enough to make it worth your money.
And
the same goes with a guitar. If you go to Warmouth and you price out to build an American professional equivalent,
right,
an apples to apples,
you're going
to spend almost $2,000.
You're going to be
just get one.
Yeah, you're going to be right around $1,250 to $1,300. And here's the problem with doing that today. My generation, the vast majority of people I know, again, this is a small cross section of people I know, are not equipped to build a guitar, even out of a kit.
Yeah.
They just don't. They don't know how to. They don't know how to do it. Number one. They
don't know how to use a soldering.
Yeah. Not even just a soldering iron. They don't even know how to hand sand. I mean, it's like you're gonna buy a guitar kit and you've never done fretwork. Like, what the hell?
I know, right?
So, and that's not to say like somebody like Dan Kish is a classic example. He's talked about building a guitar, and I told him, I said, you're probably one of the few people I know that could actually do it, because he works with his hands all day. He's got the tools, and he understands. He's been playing guitar for almost as long as I have, if not longer. In which case, for him, that's a perfectly valid like form thing for him. Like, oh, I could do this. Now, again, I cautioned him against it originally because I'm like, you can't just go down to Home Depot and buy this wood. Like, that's not the way this works. So if you're going to compare apples to apples, you need to understand, like, a lot of what you pay for is not labor in a guitar. I mean, there is some of that going on too, but a lot of what you pay for is like wood and that kind of thing. Wood drying process, finishing racks, all that stuff. Because, your guitar hangs, if you buy a Fender, your guitar might hang there for 10 days. Just drying. And now I think they're using UV hardener now. I think they're a lot faster on that. But I mean, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they had a building where they would hang bodies after they were sprayed. And Gibson still does that. So I think Gibson's a 30-day drying process.
Well, I know your guitar, the 7-string, hung. For
a couple days at minimum. But they use UV hardener on those too. So I wouldn't shock me if they're still doing that over at Fender, but I don't think they're doing it like they used to. But my point is, like, that's where your costs are at. You're having a building that's got security and heat and air conditioning and all those different things, a climate controlled environment, costs money. And so
that's right.
It's not so much, Bob who's taking home $20 an hour to go, pay his bills, that you're paying for. Like, yeah, he's involved in it, but I mean, I can't even imagine, like, in a Fender guitar, how much actual handwork is done now. There might be like an hour of hands-on work or 2 hours of hands-on work in a Fender guitar.
Your typical off the shelf. Yeah.
Because everything else is done by machine.
Little finishing.
CNC does a rough cut on the body. They might spend 10 minutes doing a sand on it. The neck. Yeah, there's probably some hand labor there. Now that
a little bit on the front.
Now that nobody's using the plec in that kind of a situation because the plec takes time. So I mean, like, you're not paying a ton of labor. You're paying 3 or 4 hours worth of labor is what you're paying.
Probably.
So $50 or $100 to assemble your Stratocaster or your Telecaster. $100, right? 4 or 5 hours, which is padding. And then, of course, they're spraying it and hanging it and the actual woods that go into it. And that's how you get a $700 guitar, right? With a 30% markup for the dealer and a 10% markup for the distributor. So at the end of the day, when you stop and you actually do the math, like, you could build a guitar yourself and it should be 40% less than what you would pay at retail.
But it's not.
But it's probably not going to be. So,
because realistically,
you're not buying in quantity.
unless you've got a plane and you've got access to the woods and you've got all the stuff. I've got a friend who's got a CNC, so he builds Telecaster bodies and necks, and actually builds tellies, but they're knockoffs. He doesn't do but 3 a year, so it's not somebody you're going to order one from anytime soon. But because he's an engineer as a trade, he's an electrical engineer, and he doesn't have time. He just does them for fun. But anyway, he did the CNC thing. Still, if you don't have that stuff, you're probably going to buy a body and you're going to buy a neck at a minimum. You're going to buy all your parts. All it is really is a Lego box.
Yeah, then it's not building a guitar, it's assembling a guitar.
Right, you're assembling it. I mean, now, even if you bought the plain wood, let's say you could get your hand on the wood, it's going to take a lot of time to get that thing right. And that socket, even if it is a bolt-on socket, there's a reason bolt-ons are used over glue, but that is still not as easy as you might think. Get that thing lined up and put that thing in and get it so that the neck is true. That's not an easy process.
No, I've seen some failed experiments. I've seen quite a few in
Even
my
with
day.
CNCs, I've seen.
Yeah. I've seen some come out of factories that are failed experiments too. So
now that said, he used a thing called Raspberry Pi.
Right.
Little computer. That's when he put his CNC, his control with that. But that's not it's not an easy task. And there's a reason that luthiers, like people who build acoustics, the Adirondack pine and the stuff they make them out of.
You can't fathom what that stuff costs. I mean, if you
God.
get furniture grade wood, which is basically what they're making most of this stuff out of, if not higher grade than that, you're going to pay. It's not cheap. I mean, flame maple, a block of flame maple that you could make a Les Paul top out of, $400.
Yeah.
Just for the maple.
And for a one-off design like that, you're going to throw a lot of that away. A lot of it's going right in the garbage. Literally.
I feel like we're doing a redo of last week's episode, but better, but slightly better.
I hope so. But I think that you would be better off just going to Warmouth, because at least Warmouth, they're getting a discount on that. Well, they're buying it in bulk relative to what you're buying.
Sure,
we would be buying. And so you would pay a lot less for a body. You'd pay a lot less for a neck. I mean, when I do my Warmouth build, I'm hoping to do one next year or the year after. I want to kind of do I want to do it my way. So I want to do it right. I want to get a roasted neck, and, right body and everything else. Probably do a bolt on because I'm going to build it, and I suck at doing anything. I can put Legos together, and that's about it. So, but I can solder and I can do that stuff. I was in electronics for a little while, but. My eyesight isn't what it used to be. So making those connections, that's why I hire somebody to.
Well, I mean, I just don't have time to assemble a kit anymore. But I mean, I could do a kit guitar. Like I've done enough guitar. I mean, I've refretted guitars before. Not many people can say that. I mean, I refretted a maple neck, Jim. Maple fretboard.
I've put in a nut.
You want to talk about separating the men from the boys? Do a maple fretboard.
I barely clean my own fireworks. I do clean them, but I jest a bit. But I'll tell you, that's something I do every time I take the strings off. But once I see enough wear on those frets that they got to get something done to them, I thought about going to what's that company? The Stumac
has the fret file.
Sells the stuff. Thought about buying a fret file.
All right, so the fret file is really for the ends. But they do make, like, you can buy sanding blocks. Well, they make and then you can do crown. You can get your crowning files and do that.
Crowning.
But you know what? Yeah. Be honest with you, I take them and get them done, and I do it twice a year. I take all my guitars going twice a year because I play them enough, and I'm going to start playing them more because I'm slimming down the amount that I have. That I really should be doing them quarterly, but I don't. I just can't afford it. So I'm slowly converting over to stainless steel on everything.
Yep, mine are going to go when I have to replace them. They're going to stainless steel. I am not putting
my S500. I've been thinking about having good time put stainless steel in it.
I'm not gonna bother with another nickel set of fret wire.
Nick and I had a conversation about it. He was like, "Well, people claim they're brighter." I just don't fucking hear it at all. Pardon my language. I just don't like.
When it's this much brighter,
it's not even that much brighter, Jim. It's almost unnoticeable. You know what I think people don't like stainless steel frets for? Because they're slippery. They are much better to play on. They're so smooth. Like, I'll never do another fret material. I really won't. I'm to the point where it's like, even if I was to buy a guitar, I've thought about like buying like I was looking at a gem the other day, and I was like, I could buy this, but if I bought a gem, like the Gem Junior, right? I'd have to pull all the frets and put stainless in it because I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not worrying about the frets being worn down or getting chunks taken out of them because I drop a case or something like that. Nickel is not a great material for this. It's not. It might be good for tone, I don't hear the difference. I don't. And I can hear the difference between brands of strings. So for me to say that I don't hear the difference is like, I'm now granted, I've never had a guitar that was nickel and then swapped it over for stainless and done the Pepsi challenge with a recording, right?
Right.
But
right.
if I can't tell, so that's the thing. If I can't tell pre and post doing it, like if I can't tell, picking up one guitar versus another that has stainless and one that doesn't, I'm probably not going to be able to tell in that situation. And if I could, it might be so minuscule it's not worth even arguing about anyway. I think the trade-off in reliability and consistency is worth it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. To be completely honest with you, I wouldn't be able to tell, not for any amount of money in the world. And that's without even trying. I know I couldn't tell. I just know I like jumbo frets, and I know that I like a smooth fret. As soon as I get a little wear in there, I can tell you right away.
Yeah.
Because the second I go to bend a note, I'm like,
you feel
that's it.
Yeah. And you know what was weird? So the other day I had that happen on my Kiesel. I was like bending, and I was like, oh, it's gritty. What the hell? And I would like do vibrato, and it would feel gritty. And I was like, what? So I look at the fret, and it's none of the fret because it's stainless steel, obviously. It was the string. The string was starting to wear. The string was starting to wear through.
Yep.
And I stopped there for a minute, and I went, okay, like,
yep. Strings gone.
No, I didn't even cut them off. I was just like, well, all right, like, because I literally I ran my finger underneath the string and got whatever material that was on the bottom of it off. It just kept playing. It's like whatever.
That is probably why I go through the effort of really polishing up the fretboard. And I say polish it, I just mean I just wipe it up real good, folks. I don't use like a bunch of cleansers.
Do you know what I use?
I do that once a year.
So when I'm polishing my frets, I get a Dremel out. Okay. I take some masking tape and I go each fret separately, but I use jeweler's rouge and a buffing wheel on a Dremel. And those frets are the shiniest and smoothest frets you've ever seen in your life. It's ridiculous. And my dad was actually the one that we were working on one of my older guitars, and like he's like, well, you could use steel wool, but he's like, the steel wool's going to come apart and get on the pickups. He's like, why don't we try this? And that I was sold instantly. The only problem with it is you have to make sure you you have to get the jeweler's rouge off of it. So if it gets too much on the sides of it, like you kind of got to scrape with your fingernail to get it off. But yeah, it's good stuff. I highly recommend that. It's a pro tip.
Yeah. And anybody who thinks that I was like plugging StewMac earlier, I'm not really.
Yeah, I don't think either of us are super huge on StewMac. They're really expensive.
No, yeah, they're very expensive. There are other companies. They're just one that came to mind when I was mentioning it.
They do make some tools that that's the only place you can get them. And that's totally when you go to StewMac. And some of the stuff they do make is really, really good. Like they have a fret press that they make that like just bolts to the side of your workbench. That's a great tool to have if you don't have a drill press. I have a drill press, so I bought the set of calls off eBay, the radius calls, and I just put them in there, and that's how I pressed my frets in.
Well, I have a workbench that I use for my guitars. That's actually where I sit when I do this podcast. It's my workbench. But I just put the neck holder on this end. I do my thing here. So.
I don't do much work. Like I've been doing my own setups now at the house just occasionally. But I don't do any fret work. And that's why the Red Unicorn is actually with somebody else right now, because they do fret work. So I was it obviously has some high frets. I could tell immediately, and I knew there was something janky going on with it. So I'm like, I'm just going to take it to them. I'll let them just do a once over on it. So I'll reveal who I took it to when I get it back. But they're going to do they're doing me a solid. Basically, they're trading me for something. So,
nice.
But yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming up on 2 hours now, so I wanted to talk about something else, but I think
we're going to have to
talk about it next year, and that's the Ventura, the Ventura series.
Yeah, whatever.
Is it Ventura?
We got 10 minutes. Let's do it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that. So Fender, speaking of Fender, they've got the new Ventura series coming. Kind of wanting to get one of the '70s Telecaster thin lines in my hands to see what I think of it. Other than that,
You and them damn
when I'm
thin
looking at
lines.
it, it's like, yeah. Other than that, I think they look. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. It's a 1150 and under line, and most of it's $1,000 and under. So good looking stuff. They've got a '60s telly with a Bixby. There's of course the Jaguar modified, and then the Jazz and so on and so forth. And these are made in Mexico. Right?
Yeah, no, they're made wherever they decide to make them.
That's what
because they're not telling anybody where they're made. Yeah, I've heard they're made in Mexico, but they're not really telling anybody anymore. They're burying it as best they can. Yeah.
Really?
Oh, I mean, it gives them the ability to make the necks over here and the bodies over here, and to combine those things together and make things more cheaply. Like I understand what they're doing, and I'm okay with it. Country of origin really doesn't matter. It's about a quality level, and if they make a $2,000 guitar that's a crap quality level, they're going to get called out for it, and that could happen over there because of their policies now. But I suspect it won't.
It's possible. It's hard.
So we're talking about
that looks like Mexico.
Ventura series here. So we're talking about Ventura series. It's just more brand confusion for me. Like I know what it's supposed to be. It's a replacement for the Time Machine, 60s, 70s guitars, and all that stuff. Like the whole idea that you could buy these vintage style guitars and whatever. It's just brand confusion. Like honestly. I really only need like one vintage style guitar from them, like they could call it the Vintage Series Strat, right? Which is like bent steel saddles, 7.25 inch radius or 9.5 inch radius, depending on what they want to do nowadays. Either you might even want to offer like an option. You can do the CBS headstock or the pre-CBS headstock. And that's all I really need. Like, I just don't think that there's really a need for a 70s Strat model or anything like that. And so I think maybe that's what they're trying to do with the Ventura series, is to like get away from that. But at the same time, I think it just makes it more confusing because now you have this series that's not clearly like a vintage thing, right?
Correct.
I guess it gives them some leeway to say, well, this is sort of like a vintage Fender, but it's really not. It's a vintage.
But it's really not.
Ventura. But so they're still doing the same line. So like they got a 50s, they got a 60s, they got a, and then they have like a regular and then a modified of both. And it's like, well which do you want to sell? Because to me, Stratocaster, I'm looking at the Ventura 50 Stratocaster modified. Like, why isn't that just another guitar? Like, why does it have to be a 50 Stratocaster modified? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, that's just it. So you've got a Ventura 70s, a Ventura 60s, a Ventura 50s, all the Stratocasters. So, and then you've got, what do you want? Perifero? I do not see I never saw a Fender Stratocaster in the 70s that had a Perifero. No. So it's already not that line. So it's just, I mean, I know what they're saying. It's the neck shape and because let's face it, the body hasn't changed. The Strat body does not change from model.
Right.
Same with the, unlike the Telly, it changes because you've got the thin line or the whatever.
Here's my issue, right? And I'm thinking to sum it up a little bit better. So you got the regular 50s model is a V-shaped neck. The 50s modified model is a C-shaped neck. Well, wait a minute. So that's the distinguishing feature, that and pickups, right? Yeah. That's the distinguishing feature. Why wouldn't I just buy any other guitar in the line that has a C-shaped neck? Like, exactly. What the hell?
You just, that's not Just take that one out of take that one out of the equation. That's what I was saying. You summed it up.
You know what I mean? Like, it's absolutely nuts. So why is there even why does the modified even exist? So wait a minute. And then if you look closely, you'll see the modifieds also have a 2-point tremolo. So it's basically whatever the American standard was a couple years ago. You know,
that's right.
Made in Mexico. Like, okay, so then just call it what it is. This is a player series with 50s pickups.
The Fender Ventura 70s Telecaster Deluxe is the Chris whatever Tele. It's the same exact guitar.
I know.
It's just a different neck. If it is a different neck.
Well,
literally they're just popping another name on them. And the Fender Ventura 70s Telecaster Custom Powell Faro is the same damn guitar with a different bridge. I'm just like,
well, they're different. They are different colors, right? So they have different colors available.
Colors.
I mean, that might be the only thing that actually makes this worthwhile, you know. And that was totally meant in jest, right? But so
I know. That's why I was laughing.
Right. Like, so here's why I laugh, right? So we have a 50 Stratocaster. That makes sense to me. We have a 60 Stratocaster. That makes sense to me. Why in God's green earth do we have a 70 Stratocaster? Why?
That was not the decade anybody wanted to buy.
No, it's still not the decade anybody wants to buy one from. Now, I do like the colors they're offering it in, but I'm not buying a big headstock Stratocaster. You're out of your mind.
Oh, I love the big headstock Stratocaster. I know you hate them.
Well, you grew up around them too, so it's different. But
yeah, I did.
By the time I got into guitars, like the big headstock thing was reserved for the cheap ghetto models, like the Affinities and stuff.
Yep. That's true.
And so for me, it's like a little bit more obscure. It is interesting to note, if you look at the picture of the 50s and 60s Telecasters, the headstocks are slightly different.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and I know they changed the headstock over the years. I just never seen them lined up that way.
So if you looked at the old, there's a reason that the old ones were the way they were. They called it the foot. What they were doing was they were able to take one piece of wood and get two guitar necks out of it. And so it was for money saving, convenience. That's why the older ones are as slim as they are. They got a little bit thicker. If you look, that's your difference in the 70s or 60s.
I mean, I honestly I think this. I think this line, like I'm looking at the 50s, the Ventura 50s Telecaster. I think a thick, soft V-shaped maple neck with a satin finish and a 9.5-inch radius fingerboard sounds perfect to me. 4-way switching with an S1 switch. Is this really a Baja Tele? Is that what this is? It's a Baja Tele with
it's a Baja
with
Tele.
A different
with four
a different color and Yep.
I'm interested in the thin line, obviously, but I'm also interested in that Bigsby.
I mean, I like classic Teles. I probably should cough up and get a cheapie somewhere along the line.
It's a 60s C profile with the vintage fretboard, and it's got the Bigsby.
I don't know. I just don't think this line needed to be adjusted at all. I think they could have been fine, and I think it should be realistically 6 guitars, right? A 50s, a 60s, and maybe a 70s. And if they're gonna do it, what they should probably do is a 50s, 60s, and then vintage modified.
Yeah. The only downside of this is, so they put a C shape, modern C shape neck, then they put a 7 1/4 inch radius on it.
What did they do?
Modern C shape neck, 7 1/4 inch radius. What?
I'm just look. I you know what? I don't care about the C-shaped neck, V-shaped neck, but the 7 1/4 inch radius on any guitar for me is like a no deal. I can't do it. I can't.
Nope.
I can't. You cannot bend on a 7 1/4 inch guitar and not have it fret out. That's why Fender stopped doing it. And now it's like in vogue. Oh well, all these old guys. Yeah, you know why? because they had the frets that were below the 12th fret worn down to nubs. And like that's how they were able to get away with it. So for me, like I see that and I'm like, gosh, why? You know, I'm not gonna sit there and have, you know, pay the guy an extra $20 to sit there and file down below the 12th fret for an extra 5 runs. It's
And then here's an interesting thing. So on Guitar Center's site where they list the Fender Ventura 70s thin line, here's something to figure out. It says in features that it's a 25.5 inch scale, 21 fret, 9.5 inch radius maple fretboard. But then in specs, it says 7.25 inch radius. So which one is it? That's
did they really? Did they pull?
It listed both. They've listed both. I guess I'd have to go to Fender's
I'm looking
site.
at it right now. It's a 7.25 everywhere I can see it. 7.25 in the details. 7.25 under features. You go down to the neck and the bottom, it's 7.25. This is a 7.25 inch radius guitar.
Yeah, so I'm looking at Guitar Center. It says features, gloss finish, 25.5 inch scale, 21 fret, 9.5 inch.
All right. So my final thought on this: is Fender really going to bring back the 7.25 inch radius and be like, this is what people need? I mean, are they just going to ignore the last 35 years of guitar making where everybody kind of realized 7.25 was too shallow unless you were really going to wear the neck out?
And it's not pre-worn. That's the difference between those of you who get the custom shop 7.25 inch radius and go, oh, or you got
I mean, they're wearing those down before you get them
because it's worn down. It's already worn in. It's effectively already become a 9.5 inch radius. I
know they're the vintage diehard purists out there will be like, I'm going to get hate mail for this. But listen, 7.25 inch radius, like if you think that you want a new guitar with a 7.25 inch radius, go buy one of these. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it after you get one, because it's going to be a whole nother ball game than that other 7.25 inch radius guitar you got that you bought that was made in 1963, or that custom shop job you bought that's made to be like that guitar you have from 1963, because they're just two totally different animals. Okay, that guitar, the 63, has been played until there's nothing left. Whereas the one you buy off the shelf is going to have brand new frets. It's going to be leveled and crowned, but it's not going to be worn in at all. And those guitars would take 5 or 10 years to wear in like that, playing every night, you know, in a club for 4 hours. That's what it's going to take. You don't wear out frets by playing an hour a day. You don't. You're going to wear out frets by playing them 4 hours a day consistently, because I've done it. I wore out the frets on one of my guitars. It took me a long time to do it. It took me almost 10 years, and I was playing about 4 hours a day. So,
yep. My American Strat, I wore the crap on. It's on its second set of frets.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I wore them out. I wore them out so bad that they were jumbos too. So it took a long.
Yeah, mine
time.
were medium.
It took me almost
medium
15
vintage.
years.
They were the Jimmy Vaughn.
Mine were what do they call them? Something jumbo. They call them.
Well, I mean, I probably could have, if I was one of these vintage cats, like I probably could have kept playing it, because they were getting low, but they were just getting unplayable for me, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore.
Mine were totally unplayable. Totally unplayable, especially from the 5th to the 12th.
Well, that's
fret,
when then you get
gone.
where you can't bend and stuff, and that's like basically what was happening to me. But I could have cranked up the action. I could have kept going, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like that's insane. The guitar already had medium high action anyway, because it's a 9.5 inch radius. You cannot play a 9.5 inch radius neck without some amount of fret rattle going on and have low action. And I don't like a lot of fret rattle. I want it to be kind of open, and I want my guitars to sustain a little bit better. So for me, like, my action was already medium high, and I was concerned that like it was going to get into high territory, so I refretted it.
Yep.
That was the one I did myself.
Yeah,
by
I
the
had
way.
to do that. And when I had it done, I won't say that it was cheap because it was far from cheap, but luckily I got a lot of work done at the time. But this was the thing when they did it. They said, "I can't believe you were playing that guitar." I said, "Yeah, I wasn't doing a lot of solos on that thing. It was a lot of open chords."
Well, my guitar tech the last time I took the S500, and he goes, "You play a lot on the G and B, don't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and I'm like, he's like, I thought he was going to say around the 5th to 7th fret, and I'm like, "Was there anywhere that was particularly bad?" And he's like, "No," he's like, "It was pretty even across the neck," and I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds about right."
Yeah, mine was between the 7th and 12th fret, and then obviously up at the 15th fret. A lot of wear up there. 12th to 17th.
Right, and that's normal. You're going to get a lot of E position wear. I usually get a lot of A, so like the 5th to 8th. But the thing is, on my guitars, like now, because I play in so many keys all the time, because I'm playing, now I'm doing 7-string tracks and then playing, playing a 6 to lead stuff and all that kind of thing. Like, it's just, I'm all over the place now. So,
yeah, I'm still playing stuff like Secret Agent Man and shit like that. So it's all right there. E standard. Or,
wait. Hey, most of Jim's riffs still require open strings. So
yes, a lot of them. I play a lot of open E notes. That string pretty much just jangles for me. That's my drone.
All right, man. I have been David.
I've been Jim.
And tonight we've been Practical Guitarists.
Somewhat.
Yep.